At her husband's funeral, she was dragged out, holding her baby. Then help came from the last person she expected. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The rain fell lightly on the steps of the old church in a quiet Charleston neighborhood, turning the stone path into a slippery trail. Madeline Carr held the baby close to her chest, wrapped in a damp, knitted blanket, while staring at the slightly open doors of the sanctuary. Inside, the altar was decorated with white lilies and a simple black and white portrait of Andrew Carr, his smile forever frozen in mourning. All she wanted was to say goodbye. She wasn't asking for flowers or a front row seat, just the chance to stand, holding her child, in front of the man she had shared everything with over the past few years. But Margaret Carr, Andrew's mother, stood blocking the entrance with a cold stare and rigid posture. Beside her, Gregory, the older brother, clutched a folded legal document. "If you don't sign this waiver, you're not taking a single step into this church," Margaret said, with the poise of someone used to erasing those she deemed unworthy. Madeline tightened her hold on the baby. His cheeks were flushed from the cold, and the blanket no longer provided enough warmth. Her eyes, though marked by dark circles and exhaustion, didn't waver. "He was my husband," she said, her voice low but steady. "I have the right to say goodbye." Margaret didn't respond. Gregory did, louder, with tension on his face. "You were never one of us, just a nameless girl from nowhere. You don't belong to this family." Madeline didn't answer right away. She glanced between the open doors, catching a glimpse of the man she loved. Her heart raced, her knees nearly gave out, but she stood firm. "I don't want your money," she said, her Spanish accent thickening with emotion. "I just want to say goodbye." Margaret folded her arms and exhaled sharply. "Then sign. Renounce any claim to his estate. That's all we're asking." Madeline swallowed hard. "You mean everything he left for our son? You want me to pretend we never existed?" Gregory stepped forward. Some guests looked on, uncomfortable, but no one intervened. "Sign or leave." The tension was thick, like the fog settling on the stone steps. Madeline looked down at the baby, now softly whimpering in the cold wind. She kissed his forehead gently, then lifted her eyes one last time toward the church. A long breath escaped her lips, then she shook her head. "No." The word came out strong, complete. And in the next second, Gregory lost control. He grabbed her arm and shoved her down the stairs. Madeline stumbled, nearly falling, but managed to grab the handrail and shield the baby with her body. His cry echoed off the church walls. "You're making a scene," Margaret hissed, adjusting her black gloves with disdain. Guests looked away. Some whispered, others pretended not to see. The doors shut with a heavy thud. Madeline remained. Outside, under the rain, the blanket was soaked and her body began to tremble. She walked slowly away from the steps, aimless. She followed instinct, not knowing where she was going, until she found a concrete bench at the end of the block. She sat with effort, the baby curled in her arms and started to cry. Her tears mixed with the rain streaming down her face. Andrew appeared in her memory, not in the casket, but in bed, smiling through the pain, telling jokes even when too weak to sit up. Cancer had taken him silently, day by day, and he never stopped being kind. On their last night, he held her hand and said, "If anything happens, he'll come." I asked him. Madeline hadn't understood. Thought it was fever talk. Now it made sense. Andrew knew his family would turn on her, and still, no one stepped up to protect her. There was only the street, the sidewalk, and a city that didn't care. People with umbrellas, passing cars, glances that never paused. She was invisible until the sound of a car slowing down caught her attention. A sleek black vehicle pulled to the curb just a few feet away. The rear window rolled down quietly. Madeline didn't notice at first until she saw the door open. A tall man in a dark coat stepped out, holding a large umbrella. He walked carefully toward her, stepping around puddles. "Madeline." His voice was calm and low. She looked up, startled. She didn't know him, but there was something in his eyes, empathy, steadiness, that cut through her pain like an unexpected beam of light. Madeline's body felt numb, her arms sore from holding the baby. She just stared, unsure if he was real. The man, with deep skin and sharp features, knelt beside her. He looked more like a lawyer than a mourner. Polished clothes, no tie. "My name is Caleb Dawson," he said gently. "I was Andrew's friend." Madeline blinked quickly. "I've never heard of you." He nodded. "We met years ago. I was doing legal aid work in South America, got injured and trapped in a collapsed shelter. Andrew carried me 4 miles to a clinic." He paused. "He said if he left me behind, you'd never forgive him." Madeline clutched the baby tighter. This couldn't be true. No one in the family ever mentioned such stories. Yet here was this stranger, speaking words only Andrew would say. Caleb continued. "He talked about you constantly. Said you had the strongest heart he'd ever known, and that if anything ever happened and I was still around, I should find you, help you, protect you." He returned to the car, opened the front door, and retrieved a large sealed envelope. Coming back, he knelt again. "It's not a legal contract. I call it a contract of compassion." He offered it with both hands. "It's a promise, written and signed by Andrew last year. He asked me to draft it, said I'd meet you someday, that I should treat you as family. No conditions, no hidden deals, just a vow of honor." Madeline took the envelope with shaking hands. She didn't open it, she just felt its weight. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "I don't even know you." "And you don't have to," Caleb replied calmly. "I'm not here to replace anyone or to rescue you. I'm here because he asked me to be." The car was warm inside, but Madeline didn't feel the heat. Her body still trembled, soaked from the rain, and the baby slept in her arms, with his tiny hands gripping the fabric of her coat. Caleb drove in silence, focused on the road, as if he knew that any word in that moment might be an unnecessary disturbance. The neighborhood changed as the car moved through the streets of Charleston. Historic homes gave way to more modern buildings, understated, with narrow balconies and pale facades. When he parked in front of a 4-story building, Caleb got out first, opened the umbrella, and shielded Madeline and Henry as she stepped out. There were no promises, no questions. He simply guided her to the elevator. They went up in silence, and when they arrived, he opened the door to a clean apartment with taupe and light green walls, and said calmly, "Make yourself at home. Stay as long as you need." Madeline stood at the threshold motionless, as if crossing that doorway meant an irreversible decision. But she entered, and the silence there was different, not hostile. It was space, a place where no one wished she would disappear. The living room was modest, without excess. A grey couch, 2 armchairs, and a bookshelf with books organized by color. No personal photos, nothing invasive. Caleb placed her bag by the wall, making no noise. Then he walked to a partially open door at the end of the hallway. "This is the baby's room," he said. Madeline approached slowly, unsure of what to expect. When she entered, she stopped breathing for a second. A white crib, a grey blanket folded neatly, a dresser with diapers, wipes, clean bottles, and a gun of formula. On the floor, a soft rug. Near the window, a yellow cushioned rocking chair. Madeline stared in disbelief. "I had help setting this up," Caleb said, sensing her surprise. "A friend with a young daughter helped me prepare." Madeline swallowed hard. This wasn't improvisation. It was care. A kind of thoughtfulness she hadn't imagined after everything she'd been through. The generosity hurt more than rejection. Faced with the unexpected gesture, all she could murmur was, "Thank you." The words barely came out. In the days that followed, Caleb maintained the same posture. Present, but never intrusive. Working silently in the back office, walking through the hallway without asking questions. Sometimes he left fresh coffee on the table. Other times he stocked the kitchen with groceries. He never commented if she cooked or not. Never made suggestions. The kitchen was hers. The space was hers. Still, Madeline remained on alert. Her hair pulled tightly back, shoulders tense, her body slightly angled when they crossed paths in the hall. Every kindness, no matter how sincere, was filtered through caution. She double-checked the locks each night. Every night. Caleb never pushed for closeness, never spoke sweetly. He simply let time pass. And that, more than insistence, slowly began to untie the knots inside her. Not because he forced it, but because he didn't. Until one ordinary afternoon, everything changed. Henry was asleep in the crib. Madeline had just finished a cup of tea and walked into her room when she noticed something different on the nightstand. A small, discreet frame. Inside, a photo of Andrew smiling, his hair messy, his shirt stained with mustard, taken in front of a food truck. It was from one of their early dates in Charleston. Andrew had been trying to say something in Spanish and completely butchered it. She'd laughed until she cried. Seeing the photo now, the tears returned, but they were softer. The frame was clean, cared for. Beneath it, a handwritten note. He's still here. Madeline turned, startled. Caleb stood at the door, holding a cleaning cloth. I found that picture in a box he left me. I wasn't sure if I should show it, but I thought it might help. Madeline sat on the bed, eyes brimming. You cleaned it. It had dust. I thought it deserved better. She didn't reply. The crying came slowly, deeply. For the first time since Andrew's death, someone had cared for his memory without asking her to forget him. That night, she didn't sleep. She stared at the photo, at the ceiling, at the baby. When morning light appeared, Madeline went to the kitchen. Caleb was already there, as if he knew. He said nothing. He grabbed a cup, placed chamomile leaves inside, and poured hot water. Then he sat at the table, leaving the seat beside him open. Madeline sat down too. I read the letters, she said, her voice cracking. He simply nodded. He knew me so well. Yes, Caleb replied, and he trusted that you'd know how to carry on. And there, between sips of tea and silence, Madeline spoke. She shared stories of her childhood in Bogota, dancing on the terrace in the rain, trying to learn English through the music Andrew had sent, their early declarations, the scares, the laughter. Caleb didn't interrupt. He offered a tissue when she cried. Nothing more. Even when the tea had gone cold, Madeline was still speaking. Words came slowly, through long pauses, scattered memories, brief smiles that faded quickly. Caleb just listened. He didn't ask questions, didn't search for meaning. He stayed, as if simply being there was what truly mattered. And in that moment, Madeline didn't feel invaded or pressured. For the first time in a long while, she felt heard, not out of duty, but out of choice. Then came the envelope, thick with a golden seal. Madeline knew, even before opening it, that it was a threat, and it was. An official lawsuit. Margaret and Gregory were seeking custody of Henry. They claimed Madeline was unstable, without income, emotionally unfit to raise a child. She sat at the table, the document spread in front of her like a blow. Her hands shook, her eyes burned. Caleb read it all in silence, then looked at her and said with resolve, "They're not taking your son. But they have money, lawyers, influence." Caleb took her hand. "Then we'll show the truth, not just fight. Show." And so began the most intense days of Madeline's life. Caleb dove into the case, not with anger, but with method. He built the defense with care, collecting photos, records, daily moments. Madeline rocking Henry, Madeline singing, Madeline raising him in 2 languages. He assembled a photo album, leather-bound, the boy's name engraved. "This isn't evidence," Caleb said, handing it to her. "It's your story." And as Madeline turned the pages one by one, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was enough. In the following days, Madeline kept to her quiet rhythm within the apartment. Caring for Henry filled most of her hours, but the silences in between were never truly empty. There was a quiet presence, never intrusive, moving through the halls with measured steps. Caleb respected her space with almost meticulous precision. He restocked the pantry, kept the apartment in order, and when they passed in the kitchen or living room, he'd offer a brief greeting. Not absent, not overbearing, just there. Madeline noticed these details, even when she tried not to. She saw how he never touched her things, how he folded the dish towels the same way each time, how he refused to treat their shared space like an obligation. Something was forming, not quite trust, but a loosening of her inner guard. Her posture didn't stiffen each time he walked by. Her hands didn't pull away. And it was in this quiet, suspended atmosphere that one afternoon she finally opened the box Caleb had mentioned, the one Andrew had left for her, with nothing but her name written across the lid. She opened it carefully, as though each gesture might trigger something she hadn't braced for. Inside, documents were neatly stacked in folders. On top of them lay a bundle of envelopes tied with a faded blue ribbon. The knot was loose, like Andrew had second-guessed closing it. Madeline recognized the handwriting immediately. His slanted letters, drawn with intention. One envelope had Caleb's name on it. The rest were addressed to her. She took a breath and opened Caleb's first. The words were clear, carrying that soft firmness Andrew reserved for those he respected. He expressed his gratitude, said the illness was cruel, that he didn't fear death, only what it might leave behind, that he was entrusting what he loved most to Caleb out of faith. "She will shut her doors," he wrote. "Don't try to force them open. Sit, make tea, listen. She'll speak when her body stops resisting." Madeline sat with the letter resting. On her knees, her head bowed. Then she picked up the envelope with her name. The paper was slightly stained. She knew, before even opening it, that he had held it too long, searching for the right words. The greeting was enough to knock the air from her lungs. Mi vida. That alone made her eyes sting. Andrew wrote the same way he spoke to her during those final evenings, when his body had grown weak, but his voice still clung to the moment. It wasn't a farewell, it was protection. He said he didn't know what was coming, but hated imagining her left without support. He didn't give advice or instructions, just memories, tenderness, and a deep recognition of who she was. "It's not fair that so much falls on you," he wrote, "but I know you'll go on because you always have, even when no one noticed." He explained that the box with Caleb wasn't a formality. It was trust, because he knew Caleb would honor her pace, her grief, her quiet. "If he's there," he wrote, "let him be. He won't ask anything of you. He'll just stay." At the bottom of the page, a final line, written with a firmer hand. "You are not a shadow. You are a root." She pressed the letter to her chest, fingers clinging to the paper as though it still carried the warmth of his hands. The room was still. Henry slept soundly in the crib, bundled in blankets. The world outside remained unchanged, grey, restless, indifferent. But inside that box, Madeline found proof that Andrew still lingered. It didn't bring comfort. It brought truth. And it was that truth that made her rise and walk to the kitchen as the sun began to dip. Caleb stood by the counter, arranging cups. He didn't speak, just reached for a mug, added chamomile leaves, poured hot water, and placed it on the table. Then he pulled out a chair and sat across from her, leaving the spot beside him empty, as always. No questions, no expectations, just presence. Madeline sat, hands folded in her lap. The steam rose in slow spirals. She watched it for a moment, then looked at him. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I read it." Caleb nodded, unsurprised. "He knew me." "He did." "And he trusted you." Caleb took a breath before replying. When he did, his tone was even. "Trust isn't something to thank. It's something to honor." Madeline didn't answer. She didn't need to. There was something between them that wasn't relief, not yet peace, but a stillness, a place where the grief still existed but no longer swallowed her whole. She didn't know if that would change tomorrow, but right then, she understood that someone was willing to stay. The next morning, Madeline started the day organizing Henry's room. She folded a few clothes, emptied a bag still sitting in the corner, and sorted out what no longer fit. Henry slept in his crib, stirring now and then, and she moved through the space with deliberate calm, not because she was at peace, but because she needed to stay in motion. Her eyes still burned, her body tense, but her mind needed something to hold on to. Later, she went to the bookshelf in the living room and retrieved the box of documents again. This time she opened it slowly, without urgency. She read what she hadn't yet touched. There were treatment receipts, copies of lab reports, a flash drive labeled with the hospital's name and handwritten notes, contact lists, financial information, legal references, and accounts. Andrew had recorded everything. There were no emotional words here, just facts, all accessible. Madeline understood what that meant. He hadn't wanted to leave her guessing. He hadn't wanted her to need help from anyone. Caleb returned from the market just before noon. He carried light grocery bags and a small box of a new tea blend. He didn't comment when he saw Madeline at the table with the documents. He simply passed by her, set the items down in the kitchen, and began putting them away. She looked up for a second. He noticed but said nothing. That was it. He didn't expect her to share. He simply respected her pace. That afternoon, Madeline read through everything her husband had left. At the bottom of the box, she found one. Last sheet, notes on Henry's health, doctor appointments, vaccine schedules, pediatricians' names. Andrew had prepared it all. He knew he wouldn't be there, and he still tried to ease what was coming. Madeline felt a tightness in her chest. It wasn't guilt or despair. It was the kind of ache that comes when you recognize care from someone you can no longer thank. That night, Henry developed a fever. Madeline snapped into alert mode immediately. Her mind raced through possibilities. Infection, a virus, teething. It was the first time he'd gotten sick since Andrew passed. She dug the thermometer out of her bag, applied a cool compress, took his temperature, and mentally tracked the intervals. Caleb appeared in the doorway while she held the baby. "Do you need anything?" he asked. "I've got it under control. Probably something minor," she said without looking up. Caleb didn't push. He went to the kitchen and came back with a glass of water and a clean cloth. He left them on the dresser. "If it gets worse, I know a 24-hour clinic 6 blocks from here." Madeline nodded. He didn't offer to take over. He just provided what she needed. When she finally got Henry back in the crib, Caleb was still awake, reading at the kitchen table. He looked her way and waited. She gave him a quiet nod and returned to the bedroom. By morning, the fever had broken. Madeline was exhausted. She had coffee with heavy eyes. Caleb had set out fresh bread, a jar of honey, and some sliced fruit. He didn't mention the night. Madeline sat, ate a little, and went back to her room. Later that morning, after showering, she noticed something new on her dresser. A small acrylic frame holding one of her old medical documents. It wasn't Andrew's or Henry's. It was hers, a test she'd taken months ago, back when she was still pregnant. Andrew had kept it, and now Caleb had placed it there without asking, not as decoration, but as acknowledgement. Madeline took the paper and stored it in a drawer. She didn't want it on display. but she understood what he meant. Caleb wasn't trying to erase anything. He was simply tending to what Andrew hadn't had time to finish. She settled onto the couch after putting Henry down. She pulled a blanket over her legs and leaned her head back. Caleb read beside the lamp, a book resting on his knees. Neither of them spoke. The time passed slowly, but it wasn't uncomfortable. She didn't need to go anywhere or explain anything. When he finished reading, Caleb closed his book, stood, turned off the kitchen light and said only, "Good night." Madeline gave a small wave in return. That night, she fell asleep without needing to leave the hallway light on. The envelope arrived late in the morning. Caleb was coming back from the bakery when he found it tucked into the doorframe. It was thick, bearing a courthouse seal in the upper left corner and neatly printed names. He walked into the apartment, set the grocery bag on the counter, and carried the envelope to the table. Madeline was in the living room holding Henry. He approached and handed it to her without ceremony. "It's addressed to you," he said. She flipped it over. "This looks official." "It does. Want me to read it with you?" She paused a second. Might be better than imagining the worst. Caleb pulled out a chair. They sat side by side, 3 printed pages straight forward. Genevieve and Gregory had filed for custody of Henry. The claim argued Madeline was emotionally and financially unfit to care for her own son. They labeled her grief as instability, her lack of nearby family as vulnerability. They framed it as a risk, legal language bent to undermine her. Madeline read slowly. When she reached the final line, she stared at it, unmoving. "They won't stop. They have resources. But we have facts," Caleb replied, "and the truth lives here. So what do we do now? We get everything in order. We show them." The days that followed were filled with spreadsheets, folders, and records. Caleb turned the living room into a workstation. Madeline gathered receipts, prenatal records, pediatric updates, prescriptions. Caleb suggested adding photos. "It might seem superficial, but the judge will want a sense of your daily life." Madeline crossed her arms. "Feels like putting on a show." "Not if it's honest, just real life. I'll take them. You approve." She thought it over. "Okay." But nothing staged. "Only what's real," he agreed. He photographed simple scenes. Madeline making a bottle, packing Henry's diaper bag, reading to him on the rug. The pictures were candid, no posing. Caleb printed them with timestamps and short captions. Then he bound them in a firm cover album with Henry's name embossed. When Madeline saw it, she flipped through silently, then left it on the coffee table, unfiled. The hearing was set for a Thursday. The courthouse was cold, with high windows and narrow halls. Henry stayed in an adjacent room with an assistant Caleb had recommended. Madeline wore a modest coat, her hair tied back. She walked in with steady steps, but her gaze was guarded. Genevieve sat opposite with a lawyer. Gregory stood by the wall, unreadable. When the judge entered, the room stilled. Questions began. Madeline answered clearly, though tension showed in her clenched hands and rigid shoulders. "Do you currently have a steady income?" "No, but I have housing, legal support, and all of my son's medical and daily needs are met." "Do you reside with Mr. Caleb Dawson?" "We share space. There is no romantic relationship. He's my legal counsel." "Does he hold any formal responsibility?" "For the child, no. But he is present." Her voice trembled slightly but didn't break. Caleb watched from the defense table. At one point she looked to him. He gave a subtle nod and stood. Walking to the center, he placed the album before the judge. "Your Honor, the legal arguments are in the file. I won't repeat them. What's in this album shows this child's reality." He opened the cover. "Here, the mother teaches 2 languages. Here she holds him through a fever. Here she cooks, schedules appointments, reads stories." He turned 2 more pages. None of these moments were staged. They simply happened. The judge listened closely. The other side speaks of lack of structure. But structure is more than money. It's consistency. Who shows up? Who soothes? Who answers? The call at midnight. He closed the album. This is a mother. He returned to his seat. There was no rebuttal. The session ended shortly after. The judge announced the decision would be issued in writing. Outside, Madeline buttoned her coat quickly. Caleb walked beside her, unhurried. "You think it was enough?" she asked. "It was honest and clear. They're not going to back down." "Maybe not. But they know now. You're not alone." Madeline didn't reply. But though her face looked tired, it was steady. The envelope with the decision arrived 4 days after the hearing. It was smaller than the previous one, lighter, but held more weight than any document they'd received so far. Caleb was in his office when the intercom buzzed. He took the envelope upstairs, still sealed, and handed it to Madeline without a word. She was on the couch with Henry in her arms. She stared at the seal from the courthouse in silence, then held Henry closer and pressed the envelope to her knees before opening it. She read it once, then again. Her eyes closed before she spoke. The request had been denied. Her voice didn't shake, it just dropped a little. Caleb moved closer but said nothing, waiting to see if she wanted him there. She looked down at the page again, calmly this time. She explained that the judge had refused to grant custody. There was no evidence of instability, no merit to the claim. The decision was direct, unambiguous, and effectively shut down any further legal threat. Madeline took a deep breath, adjusted Henry in her lap, and gave a subtle nod. In that moment, she truly was okay. Later that afternoon, she went up to the building's rooftop. The air was brisk and the sky was clear. She stood for a while, gazing out over the rooftops and at an old antenna swaying on the neighboring building. Caleb joined her a few minutes later, hands in his coat pockets, his steps quiet. He stopped a few feet away, not touching, not calling, out. When he finally spoke, he only asked if she wanted company. She answered with a small nod. They stood there together, not speaking. Then, still looking ahead, Madeline said she hadn't expected such a definitive ruling. She had been bracing for another delay, another hurdle. Caleb said he understood. She added that for a moment she thought she might have to pack up and leave, and if she had, she would have gone alone. Caleb told her that if it were up to him, she wouldn't have gone anywhere. Madeline didn't respond, didn't turn, just listened. In the days that followed, their lives settled into something closer to normal. There were no more court dates, no more unexpected calls. Henry began sleeping better. Madeline cooked more often, moving through routines with care. She started to notice the little things, the basket of toys, a loose button on Henry's winter coat, the stack of unsorted papers by the printer. Caleb remained steady, working from home, tending to his own tasks and helping when needed. One morning, while rinsing a bottle, Madeline mentioned she was thinking about getting out more, doing something outside the apartment to clear her mind. Caleb, setting out mugs for coffee, asked if she meant returning to work. She said not yet, maybe a course, maybe volunteer work. She just wanted to remember what it was like to make choices without fear. He told her he knew a woman who ran a community center in a nearby neighborhood and could introduce them. Madeline thanked him and said she'd consider it. 2 days later, she visited the center. It was small but well run. There were moms with kids, teens doing schoolwork, and a donation area in the back. She stayed for a few hours observing. At home, she told Caleb what she'd seen. Said she didn't know yet how she could help, but she wanted to try. Caleb listened carefully without interrupting. When she finished, he said he thought it was a beautiful idea, that anything reconnecting her with the world outside was already a meaningful start. On a quiet Friday night, after Henry had gone to sleep, Madeline found Caleb in the living room, sorting through a stack of printed photos. Everyday images, Henry, playing, the apartment in various states of life, mundane details. Caleb explained that he'd been documenting their life bit by bit. No goal in mind, just preserving something for the future. Madeline looked over the photos. She told him he'd make a good godfather. He smiled gently and said he already felt like one. That apartment, which had once been just a shelter, was now a shared space. Madeline still didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was beginning to look ahead. And for now, that was enough. Morning settled into a new rhythm after the court decision. Madeline began waking before Henry, brewing coffee while Caleb took out the trash or made a quick run to the store. They had built a quiet partnership, each doing their part without having to ask. Caleb would begin his workday after breakfast, and Madeline used the quieter hours to handle small tasks, answer emails, and consider new possibilities. The community center had invited her to join a youth reading workshop. She hadn't accepted yet. It wasn't a major decision, but it was the first in a long time, not born of necessity, but of choice. One afternoon, Henry skipped his usual nap. Madeline brought him into the living room and played with him on the floor, stacking wooden blocks and naming shapes and colors. Caleb walked in holding a book and a glass of water. Instead of heading straight to his desk, he sat on the floor. With them, Henry tugged at his shoelace and burst out laughing. Caleb made a goofy face in return, then glanced at Madeline and remarked that Henry was becoming more observant. She agreed, said he recognized voices, understood objects, and picked up more than people realized. Their conversation flowed naturally, light and easy, suspended in that late afternoon stillness. The next day, Madeline found a box on the kitchen table while preparing dinner. Inside were neatly labeled containers of homemade baby food and a note in firm handwriting. Thought this might save you some time. Caleb had come home early, gone shopping, prepared the meals, and portioned them for freezing, all without saying a word. He just left them there for her to find. Madeline stood still for a moment, holding the note. Then she tucked it away and continued cooking, feeling the quiet weight of the gesture. Later that week, the community center director called to invite her to a casual meeting about new programs. When Madeline told Caleb, he immediately offered to watch Henry that afternoon, said he'd adjust his schedule and make sure she could leave with peace of mind. Madeline smiled with quiet relief. She returned 3 hours later to find Caleb and Henry on the living room rug, surrounded by toys and children's books. Caleb was reading softly, Henry fully absorbed. Madeline watched from the doorway for a moment before joining them. She didn't say anything, just sat beside them and let the evening unfold. On Sunday, while Henry napped, Madeline sorted old clothes for donation. She worked methodically and occasionally called Caleb in for a second opinion. He helped her decide what to keep and what to give away. In one pile, they came across a coat that had belonged to Andrew. Madeline held it briefly, then folded it carefully and placed it in a separate bag. Caleb noticed but said nothing. He carried the bag out to the hallway. When he returned, he found her seated on the floor, quietly looking at Henry's tiny socks. She said some memories still stung, and probably always would. Caleb answered that not all memories need to be erased. Some just need to be rearranged. That evening, Madeline made chamomile tea and asked Caleb to sit with her on the couch. They talked about the weeks ahead. He mentioned a short business trip, just 2 days, and asked if she'd feel okay staying alone. Madeline said she would, but admitted she'd miss having someone to talk to at night, even just to share the silence. When she joked that Henry would miss bedtime stories, Caleb promised to record a few. That way, even when he was away, he'd still be part of their routine. Madeline thanked him with a gentle smile. It wasn't about obligation, it was about care. And to her, that was starting to mean real friendship. The following weeks brought a new rhythm to the house. Caleb had gone on his short trip as planned, leaving behind recordings of bedtime stories. Madeline played one each night for Henry, who listened wide-eyed, recognizing the familiar voice. When Caleb returned, the apartment felt fuller, as if someone essential had come back. Madeline noticed it when he walked in with a new book in hand and casually asked if Henry still enjoyed the stories. The boy, now beginning to speak a few words, smiled and pointed at him. Madeline laughed and said he had missed Caleb. Caleb smiled back and said he had missed them too. And for the first time, neither of them hid how much that connection mattered. The reading workshop at the Harbour Family Centre began with a small group of children between 4 and 7 years old. Madeline handled the reading sessions while Caleb helped set up the room. As the kids listened to stories on colourful cushions, some mothers waited outside. At first, they stayed quiet, checking their phones or glancing at the clock. But slowly, they began talking to one another. One spoke about work, another about not having any. Someone mentioned her child's tantrums. Someone else whispered that rent was due and she didn't know how to cover it. Madeline overheard snippets of these conversations. She shared them with Caleb later. He suggested something more, a space for the mothers too. With the help of volunteers, they set up a small adjoining room. Comfortable chairs, a table, and a thermal pot, always filled with coffee. Nothing extravagant, but enough to feel welcoming. Each afternoon during the workshops, the mothers began to share stories, ones not written in books. Some opened up about past abuse, others about loneliness, fear, or unexpected strength. Madeline wasn't a therapist, but she knew how to listen, and that was enough for many. She became someone they sought out. When she told Caleb that it all felt like it needed more structure, he didn't respond with grand plans. He simply asked, "What's missing?" She answered, "Time, listening, continuity." He said, "Then that's what we'll build." Henry now spoke more clearly, walked confidently, and joined a group of children his age at the center. He called Madeline Mommy with affection, and one day when he tripped and Caleb picked him up, he called him Uncle. No one had told him to. It just happened. Madeline heard it from the hallway, and when he repeated it, something inside her tightened and warmed all at once. Caleb heard it too, smiled softly and carried on with the day. That night, as she tucked Henry into bed, the word echoed in her mind. Caleb had never asked for a place. He had simply made one for himself, gently. Seeing how the group had grown, the center's coordinator proposed seeking funding through partnerships with socially responsible companies. The goal was to expand the programs, bring in professionals, and ensure long-term support. Madeline listened carefully. To her own surprise, she didn't reject the idea. She admitted she wasn't ready to lead a large project, but she trusted the people already involved. Caleb encouraged her, saying that letting something grow could be its own form of care. Over time, they formed a modest committee of mothers, volunteers and educators to map out next steps. One rainy afternoon, Madeline was picking up toys from Henry's room when she found Caleb in the kitchen making soup. She joined him, pulled out 2 bowls, and sat with him at the table. After they finished eating, she said she couldn't quite explain the feeling, but despite all she'd lost, she had never felt more useful. Caleb smiled, carried her bowl to the sink, and replied, "I get it. Doing something that feeds the heart. That's what matters." The idea of a committee took shape in the weeks that followed. Simple meetings in the late afternoon, notebooks balanced on laps, children playing nearby. Each mother brought a viewpoint, a concern, a suggestion. Madeline took notes, made calls. To professionals she knew, asked about workshops, activities, possibilities. Caleb handled the logistics, delivering materials, printing flyers, setting up the space. There were no titles, no official duties, but there was commitment. And that commitment, even without formality, kept everything moving. Gradually, the Harbour Family Centre became a neighbourhood staple. Children and mothers spent their afternoons there, and the space took on a new life. Henry arrived each day with bright eyes, running toward his little friends. The toys, once stored in a corner, now filled the patio on sunny days. Toy cars, picture books, bouncing balls, jump ropes. The mothers brought snacks, shared responsibilities. Madeline, always nearby, watched attentively. She no longer questioned whether this made sense. It was happening. It was real. And quietly, she knew. It was changing not just her life, but many others too. Madeline adapted naturally to the new rhythm. Mornings were for house routines, afternoons for the center, evenings for coming home with stories to tell. Caleb listened with genuine interest, even if it was just about the new trash bin near the playground. They laughed over the odd situations that came with their work. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was tangible, and to Madeline, it began to feel more meaningful than any plan she'd once imagined. She remembered Andrew often, with love and fondness. She spoke of him to Henry. Naturally, she said he had been a good man, who loved books, and who one day chose to trust someone else to keep caring for her. Caleb never tried to take anyone's place. He remained the uncle who sliced fruit on Sundays, picked up Henry when Madeline was late, and remembered the pharmacy run when the cough returned. He never asked for anything, never hinted at expectations, but he was always there. Madeline noticed how instinctively Henry reached for him, how he'd leave her arms to settle in his, or how, for no particular reason, he'd say, "Uncle, stay with us tonight?" Caleb would smile and say yes, because truthfully there was nowhere else he'd rather be. On an ordinary Saturday, Madeline hosted a group snack gathering. Each mom brought something: cake, juice, popcorn. The kids ran between chairs. The adults talked, laughed, exchanged numbers. It was the kind of scene Madeline hadn't known she could live again, but it was right there in front of her. When the afternoon came to a close and the last families left, she and Caleb stayed behind, collecting plates and folding chairs. As they packed up, she paused and said, "That was nice, wasn't it?" He replied, "It was really nice." And Madeline smiled the kind of smile that doesn't happen by accident. The document arrived via registered mail. Madeline recognized the last name on the envelope before even opening it. She called Caleb, who was in Henry's room, and the two of them sat down together. The paperwork was thick, legal terms, official, stamps, signatures repeating Andrew's name again and again. Caleb read aloud in a steady voice, explaining each part. Andrew's family had attempted to dispute Henry's legal paternity, but the notarized documentation, medical records, and earlier declarations made the bond indisputable. Henry was, officially, Andrew's heir. The inheritance was secured in an investment fund to be accessed only when Henry came of age. Until then, Madeline, as his legal guardian, could use it only for essentials: education, healthcare, and housing. She sat there for a long time, the envelope in her lap. It wasn't just about money, it was about recognition of what she and Andrew had shared, of who Henry was, of who Andrew had been. Caleb watched her quietly. When she finally stood up, she only said, "Thank you for never giving up on this." He smiled with that calm expression she had come to know so well. "It was never about not giving up," he said. "It was about doing what was right." In the following months, Madeline remained deeply involved at the center. The new partnerships with social organizations strengthened their network of support. Now the Harbor Family Center offered counseling services, tutoring programs, and skills workshops for mothers. Henry thrived among books and open conversations. Madeline was no longer just Andrew's widow. She was known in the neighborhood as a dedicated, respected woman. Caleb stayed part of everything, but the bond, they had never needed a label. They had dinner together, shared grocery runs, took turns with Henry. One chilly evening, Madeline was brewing tea in the kitchen when she heard footsteps. Caleb entered, hair damp from the rain, a package of cookies in hand. He said he remembered. She liked those on cold nights. They sat at the table, as they often did, talked about the center, the moms, the kids. Eventually, Madeline paused and took a deep breath. I never thought I'd have anything after Andrew. I'm not talking about romance. I mean real support, having someone to rely on, feeling safe enough to take care of someone else. And you gave me that, steadily, quietly, never promising anything but always being here. Caleb didn't speak until she finished. Madeline continued, now I understand why Andrew trusted you so deeply. You really are everything he said, and more. Thank you for everything you've done, for both of us. You're an incredible person. He smiled, took her teacup and brought it to the sink, just like always. Then he said, life's not easy, but when you find someone to walk beside you, things feel different. Andrew was like a brother to me. I'd never leave his wife and son without support. You're like family to me. She didn't respond immediately, just sat there watching each of his movements closely. That was where she drew her strength from. Now, the trust they'd built didn't need to be explained. It was something she felt every single day. The end. So what did you think of this story? Leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new video. See you next time.